Hello, everybody, and welcome back to that Milan podcast. Martino Puccio, Matt Santangelo, alongside you guys again. Sorry for the delay. Been very busy. We had some wintry weather up here in the New York, New Jersey area, but we are all here and ready to talk all things Milan, from transfers to the debacle against Juve, and then the preview again tomorrow against Girona. Yes, Milan are playing every 3 days. We have highlighted this in pretty much every episode on why it's going to be so daunting for them to kind of turn things around in a short order of time. So yeah, shall we just get right into it, Matt, and rip this Band-Aid off that has been ripped? A horrible display by Milan. I am more disappointed with the second half of this game than almost anything I've seen this season for the most part, probably since the first two games against Parma and Torino. I will say that in the first half, Milan had their fair chances. They had opportunities to score, and they were terrible at finishing once again, which has been a story for a very long time with this team. We go back all the time on the years for this. Juve completely dominated in terms of the midfield in this game. I don't think there's any question about it. The quality was leaps and bounds better. Milan looked lethargic, lazy. The passes, or lack thereof, was just horrendous. And Juve completely deserved to win this game. And yeah, I think the scoreline was reflective of what we saw on the pitch. So there really isn't much for me to actually say when it comes to this. They got outplayed, and badly, and Juve finally put together a great game for themselves, which they have rarely done this season. So kudos to them. They pick up the 3 points here. Not all is lost in terms of Milan, but Matt, I'm getting the sense from a lot of people that they're more upset than I kind of would have imagined. I would assume it had to do with just losing to Juve and the fashion that they did. What was your main takeaway from this outside of just the poor result? Was it just that second half performance, or you thought even throughout the whole 90 minutes it was just pathetic?
Yeah, I thought the 90 minutes was unacceptable. Sergio Conceição has been, kind of laying down what his expectations are as far as the mentality, the approach, just the overall expectation is what he wants from his guys, right? And mind you, this is only still, 3 weeks, give or take, on the job for him. He's coached a decent amount of matches so far, both cup play and Serie A so far. So he's having that understanding of, okay, I'm seeing these players on a daily basis. I'm seeing how they're performing in game. I'm seeing what the results are of the prep work we're doing in the ramp up to these games, and it's unacceptable. It's not to the standard and liking of him. Obviously, he's been very vocal. He's going to continue to be very vocal, and he should be very vocal because that's how you raise the bar. That's how you raise the standard at AC Milan. So I do, in fact, like what he is saying in the media, because I think he's not naming players specifically, although he did mention Teo and Leao, basically saying, you can't rely on these two individual players and, your main guys to always carry you to victories. And that's something that we've been singing as fans for a while now, right? Where, if it's not Pulisic or Leao or this, then it's pretty much Milan have no fight in any of these games, it seems. So, very disappointing. All credit to Juventus. I thought the second half, they were more ruthless, more cutthroat, and that sort of a counterattacking approach that they were playing. I think that's kind of almost frustrated Juventus fans a little bit because they know that Milan have been playing better under Sergio Conceição. There is a better feeling around him, although the results and overall performances haven't quite reached the level we want just yet.
Mm-hmm.
But they see the type of players that Juventus have. They see that they're able to play this way, right? Because we've been harping on and criticizing their lack of having a stranglehold on certain matches, right? Second half, they're not able to quite finish games off. They're letting teams kind of linger around, and that's why they're drawing as many games as they have, right? But you saw them in the second half. They getting the ball, numbers forward, really bringing it to Milan, exposing them. And Mignon wasn't very good in this game. The defense wasn't very good in this game. And the midfield, as you just mentioned, right, looked probably one of its worst performances in recent weeks. But I think this was coming, right? Certain results, the Super Cup games and the Como game, they kind of gave some Milan fans, not all, not us, this perception that, we're all playing at a really high level right now as a group. But Fofana and Tijani had one of their worst games in a while. It wasn't just Ismail Benacer. So, like, I
No,
think
yeah,
I
it
want
was
to
the
reiterate this
collective.
point.
The
I
collective.
want to reiterate this point that, this isn't a witch hunt against Ismail Benacer, who came off early in this game. He wasn't very good, in my opinion, but neither
No,
was Fofana, neither
none
was
of them.
Tijani, and neither was the collective group, and that's why you got the 2-0 defeat.
Yeah, I mean, they were just completely outbossed. Juve looked not only like fresher. Again, it just looks like the
They had a
midfield is.
point to prove after
They
losing
they
the game.
did. I think they were
Yeah.
really upset with how that second half went in the
Yeah.
Super Cup, which is. I'll just say this about Juve fans: it is so funny when you guys pick and choose when the victory matters. It's just very funny to me. You're very loud now. You're very quiet for almost half a decade. So, kudos to the win, but please stop acting like it's some incredible side. Juve still remain far off the top. Milan aren't that far behind Juve, despite Juve being undefeated. I think that's just, again, the frustration that very much lies with Milan, and where there have been some parallels between these two teams is that Juve still managed to get the draws. Milan were getting losses in the worst of times, right? Like that loss against Atalanta wouldn't really happen to Juve with that defensive lapse at the end there.
Yeah.
Juve, I think the flaws were still there in this game. They did a great job of like bending, not breaking defensively, but a better team that has good finishers ends up scoring against them.
Yeah.
And I think the game goes differently. I think it's a combination of Juve playing very well in the second half, particularly. It's also a reflection of where Milan are at, because this is still the Jekyll and Hyde stuff that we have been
Yeah.
talking about. And now I think where the results were kind of happening with Juve and Milan these past couple of times, Juve kind of smelled blood in the water. They're at home, and listen, to me, Juve standards, they're bad. They're not very good, but they're capable of pulling this kind of stuff. Very similar to Milan, if they're able to finish their chances, they can be difficult to beat. And I think that's kind of what we saw with Juve here. There's not much left for me to say. This is exactly what I kind of expected, despite Conceição and the team winning the Super Cup. There's going to be a lot of turbulence. And I think the final point I want to touch on, Matt, that I think you have mentioned and quite a few people mentioned, I understand Milan have injuries, but the quality and depth in which came off of the bench, respective of the two teams, was staunch. It was a drastic difference. Juve had far more quality to bring on than what Milan had, and it reflected in what ended up happening. So again, I don't have much left to say. Like, that was just straight up. That's like the first time in a while I would say that Juve were clearly better than Milan, and there isn't much left to say about
and
that.
Just to kind of piggyback off that real quick, and then we'll transition over to some of the more pressing topics when it comes to the market. I think it was, we have some injuries, Chukwueze, Pulisic, right, that are out. Right, Loftus-Cheek, right? So some of the primary names that you would come to know of Milan, and some of the guys that are first to come off the bench in most cases, right? But you look at there was one instance, I think Milan made a double switch. It was Terciano and Jovic coming off, and you were down. So it's like, it's telling when you look at it. And again, this isn't, no disrespect to any of the, like, I try and support the players as I can, but we call it like we see it, as far as who is Milan quality and who should be considered Milan quality and who isn't. Yeah. And when you're down and you're chasing a game, those two players, a player that's really one of the last guys on the roster when it comes to your team, Terciano, and Jovic, who's been basically frozen out despite giving the number 9 shirt, kept for another year, and has been in talks for a move, right? So I again, just kind of putting that thing into perspective. And then when you look at Juventus and who they're bringing on, and we see this quite a bit, right? Where it's like, for all of Thiago Motta's faults, for all of Juventus's faults, the truth of the matter is this: while the quality of a player isn't always going to show and make the ultimate difference, in more cases than not, even if you have flaws in your team and within your system, a really good player can still come on, take the game by the scruff, and make an impact.
Yeah.
And right now, Milan really don't have that in abundance. So
Yeah.
that leads us obviously into the market pretty decently, I think.
Yeah, which is very funny to say considering today is January 21st. It very obviously seems to me that a new manager has come in and in the middle of essentially a crisis has said, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough. You could leave. If we get some money there, depending on what happens over the next 6 months, depending on some of these players, your value might be in the tank or not great. And there's multiple players that we have to talk about in regards to this. So we'll just kind of talk about the broader scope of things because there's quite a few players. We'll specifically discuss two main players that seem like they're closer to leaving than they are staying. So we'll start with like the fire sale type of thing. Noah Okafor likely still on the chopping block despite the RB Leipzig failure of a transfer. We also have Luka Jovic, who you had just mentioned, that is likely on his way out. Monza seems to be the hot name and target there. For Okafor, there's some Bundesliga and some Premier League teams. We'll see what ends up happening in regards to that. And then Emerson Royale and Pavlovic. We'll get into Emerson Royale and Pavlovic. Again, there's a lot to kind of unpack here. The first thing we'll say is that I don't disagree with any of the departures. However, I do have a problem with when this is happening and how late into the window and how late these decisions are. I know Okafor is a little bit of a different matter because that fell through last second, which wasn't reflective of his shape. That had to do with the formula in which Leipzig proposed, and they changed last minute. That was stated by Ali Fisher and Sempre Milan Italia, which we had mentioned in the past episode. The problem is when you have something like this, I have two things to say about it. One, it's incredibly late in this window, Matt, to be doing this, despite that. And secondly, you kind of just got these players in here and you're immediately going back on your decisions. And two of these players hadn't even been here for a year, one of which everyone was adamantly against in Emerson Royale. And Luka Jovic, everyone was befuddled by the fact that he was given the number 9 shirt and an extension when it looked like he was clearly the odd man out. You sign Morata, you have Camarda coming on through, you have Tammy Abraham. It didn't make sense. And then obviously Emerson Royale. Again, I keep forgetting he has Kaká's number, which is just in its own right. For me, this annoys me on multiple levels because one, this is all an indictment on this current management, in which everybody knew that these guys were mistakes for the most part. Not Okafor, I would say. I think everybody still kind of welcomed him as a potential good player. The rest is sort of like, all right, like we knew we had question marks. We knew we were cutting corners, or Emerson Royale, for example, just straight up bad. And Milan are now putting themselves in a window here where they have some injuries. And Chukwueze has also been mentioned on the chopping block as well. I almost forgot him. So excuse me for that. When you have all that, you're late into the window, you're kind of behind in the standings. It's all a culmination and a mixture of things on top of sacking the manager that you had over the summer, by the way. So for me, some people are happy about this fire sale. I'm not even that happy because we knew this was not supposed to be a thing, and they recognize their mistakes far too late when the fan base is noticing them before they do. And guess what? The fan base, as much as we like to pat ourselves on the back, I don't want to be right over the management. I don't want to I don't think everyone wants to consistently prove them wrong. And that's kind of the problem where we're at now because Milan face multiple players potentially leaving. And if they do, that's okay. But you have around 10 days to replace them. So you're kind of full scope with this where it's coming to, hey, Milan are getting rid of some of the dead weight or supposed dead weight within the squad, but they have 10 days to replace it.
The inner dealings and handling of the Milan market are indicative of the management and are yet another example of lack of proper squad build, foresight on ultimately what players fit the billing and which ones don't. And now it's basically a mad dash and a hustle to correct the mistakes that they made that frankly, as you just pointed out, Martino, the entire fan base, for all their flaws, for all their faults, and all their poor judgment when it comes to talent and evaluation of players and all those sorts of things, it's pretty damning that this fan base is right. And they're not just right about, just Emerson. They're right about several players within this team. They're right about the direction of this club. They're right about the overall transfer policy. And when you have people with a Twitter account that just simply can watch the club, watch everything unfold from a bird's eye view, no real stake in the club other than being a fan. We're not getting paid to do this. We're not sitting here making thousands upon thousands as content creators where we have a major impact on the decision making. And we're right. It's truly telling because these people that were paid to come in here and to help further this Milan project are failing yet again, right? So it's not just hey, we have an understanding and we realize we probably made a mistake with the signings of last summer, right? But now it's another where it's like, wow, you guys are really a non-committal because you're quickly making these changes that frankly we saw coming before you even made the move to get these players in. That's what's really mind-blowing. And what makes it more embarrassing is now the timing of it, right? Because I think if you can make that acknowledgement, right, and this is kind of hand in hand with the timing of the Fonseca sacking, right, where many people thought that should have came earlier. Same thing. People thought, you and I and many others thought Sergio should have been the hire or maybe one of the main hires in the summer.
Yeah.
You elect to go Fonseca, and I'm going to get to my final overall point. You bring Fonseca in, who many were like universally saying like he's a decent coach, but he's not the one. Then you wait 17 match days, 18 match days before the season. It almost feels like we already lost the season, Serie A, because every result matters that much more.
The title's
right?
over. There's no shot.
When it comes to at least top four, right? Because we might get fifth. Fifth might be an option for Serie A, but it looks like
it might be. Yeah, it depends on
right. Then you make the change, and you make the change before some crucial cup matches. Thankfully, the coach and the group were galvanized by the decision, and they got a Super Cup to come into Casa Milan. Now you're able to make an appraisal of this group, and Sergio is able to do the same after having the job for weeks. And now you're waiting till the 21st. It looks like I'll give him a couple days because what reports are coming out with
stuff can happen fast. It could move fast.
Things can move fast, right? But again, improper planning, improper squad building, and not the right direction, and not just an overall confidence that Milan fans can feel in this moment. Yeah. Because for all the faults that people like to point out with Maldini and Mazzara and Elliott and Gazidis and all the people in that previous regime, when they had their budget restrictions and they had their market approaches, at least felt a little bit more respectable in their advances for certain players. Like they would work on a player, and if they couldn't get over the hump with fee or whatever, they would maybe move on to somebody else, and they would try to get deals done. This team is in the best financial position in decades. They're making clumsy decisions when it comes to transfers, spending frivolously on players that simply do not fit the billing and do not fit the project. And 6 months in, they're basically admitting their mistakes. And not only that, they're giving the coach, okay, so now if you get rid of all these players, right? Let's say Pavlovic leaves, who I read a report from Luca Bianchin from Gazzetta that he might play tomorrow against Girona, a guy that by all accounts might be sold. Emerson, the same thing. So now you're not even giving the coach enough guys and resources, and then he's got to bring new guys in to all of a sudden adjust to a tumultuous situation and seemingly adapt to a brand new league. Like that's where, and I tweeted this out yesterday, that's where it's not just spending money, but it's like strategy, prep work. And this is the direct result of an improper summer market, because you're seeing the fallout and the effects of their mishaps last summer.
And the frustration only grows because everybody knew it.
Exactly.
That's really what it was. And everybody knew it.
Martino, we wanted to be wrong. We wanted to be wrong. Prove me wrong. Shut me up, shut you up, and make the right signings.
Yeah. No, it's so funny because everyone would like to like argue in general, but it's the reality of which everybody has the same goal at the end of the day is that they want to see Milan win. So for me, I think that I understand some of these moves, but very much like my New York Jets is that okay, yeah, we know we have to make new choices, decisions. We have to get a new GM, we have to get a
Mhm.
new head coach. Same thing with like Milan, we have to get in new players, we have to get new directors. It ultimately falls back on ownership, and it's like, do you trust ownership to make the correct decisions? And almost every single, and here's the funny thing, right? So I just want to do this before we talk about specifically Royale and Pavlovic, because I think this is just a kind of important thing for people to note going into these next few months. What is and this is kind of the parallel with what happened with Thiago Motta last year, right? Are they going to hang on to certain people and not prep for the future and instead hanging on for things to drastically or dramatically change in the final minute in the 11th
Mhm.
hour for them to stick with what they have, meaning Jeffrey Moncada and this management? Are they going to move on for them from them, right? And if so, who are they going to have lined up? Have they decided this? Moncada's contract expires in June. When is that move going to take place, whether or not he gets extended? Does it rely upon what is going to happen in the next few months or even in the next 10 days or so? Like, all of these things are culminating into a
Mhm.
potential disaster. And say Milan, which is it's very possible and likely at this point that they miss out on top four and going into the Champions League. And it's funny that like Sempre Milan is tweeting out these stories. Milan could stand to lose 90 million if they don't go into the Champions League. Well, good job cutting corners, guys. Something we have not been complaining about and talking about because and it was funny because the title was labeled Milan could miss out on golden 90 million by making the Champions League, and I had tweeted out saying, "Okay, well you're spending copper to try and get to gold. You can't do that. You can't expect to sign players that are not of the Champions League quality and expect to get back into the Champions League because you were cutting corners. Scared money don't make money. How many times does this have to be said? When you go and cut corners with people who don't know what they're doing, right? It's not essentially, hey, you're not spending that much money. You don't even have the competent people that know how to spend cheaply because you see all these collages and pictures of like, look at these Maldini flops and signings. They were all low risk. They didn't cost that much money. And guess what? All those pictures and players that you showed a combination of all cost less than just Emerson Royale himself. So you realize in which the misses that happened from Maldini and that management were few and they were small. With this management, they're bigger and there's a wide range of them. So when Milan are kind of put into this position where they don't know what they want to do moving forward, it's a disaster because guess what? Directors from Atalanta, Bologna, even Atletico Madrid. The name is escaping me. The director from there who's also leaving. You think other clubs don't want these guys? You don't think that they're lining up, waiting at the window, saying, "Hey, we'll hire you. We'll bring you in. You did a great job at these clubs. We'd be willing to bring you in for this kind of stuff." And that's kind of what gets me so frustrated because we also don't even know who's making these decisions at the end of the day. Who has the final say? The
Mhm.
manager has to come out and say, no, you got to go and talk to the press prior to the game because I have to focus on the match. They can't even sort that out correctly because we all knew Maldini or Masada used to comment publicly prior to the game starting, right? We remember all those pregame comments on a consistent basis. With this Milan, you don't know who is who. We see, like, and I've said this, we see Moncada saying things, we see Zlatan saying things. This is all a culmination of a lack of hierarchy, and it's going to blow up in their faces. And quite frankly, I'm tired of it. You're tired of it. And we're supposed to allow them to also make these decisions with 10 days left in the window on top of their jobs potentially being on the line. We don't know if they're here for the future. We don't even know what their jobs are. And we're supposed to sit here and trust these guys to make the right calls for what the future is going to be. I mean, it's just a joke. And quite frankly, it's going to frustrate me because if they do make, say, permanent signings, Matt, in January, guess what? What happens if there's new directors in here because you fell short of your goals? Do they like some of the players that you have in the squad? What are they going to do in terms of leverage if they have to sell some of them? Like, what is the plan here? And so we'll get into some of these, right? Because what was the plan with this? What was it? We knew he sucked. We knew he wasn't good enough. Yet you had him. Yet you kept playing him, and now you're trying to get rid of him. Galatasaray, I am gracefully, coming here and asking you for a favor. Please just take him off our hands. Emerson, I'm sure you're a nice guy. I'm sure you mean well. I mean, that clip that's going around today of you basically taking out Jovic in training is just horrible. But please, like, just there's time. Just rip the Band-Aid off. Like we were saying at the start of the episode, rip the Band-Aid off of that Juve disaster. Rip it off with Emerson. Just get rid of him. And I know there's some people, again, I know I'm rambling, final point here. Some people were like, hey, we don't have that great a depth to bring in 34-year-old Kyle Walker, to have Davide Calabria and then Jimenez or even Musa as like emergency right backs or filling in at that right back position. I do not care, because if Royale stays here longer than through the June, for example, his value is going to get even worse. So you have to take what you can get now before it turns into a bigger disaster, because it already is one. But you could limit some of the damage. Just cut your losses with this one. Emerson Royale, if he's able to leave, there's rumors of Fulham as well. If he's able to leave, just do it, because you know you're bringing in Kyle Walker. You can manage for 6 months. You can manage for 4 or 5 months. Florenzi will come back in like April or so. You can manage. You can manage that position, because it can't get much worse than what we're seeing. This is a must sell, and absolutely as soon as possible. And I don't mean to be rude in any way in which I'm saying this.
Emerson Royale, we knew this, right? We knew what player he was. We knew what player he wasn't. And, Tottenham fans told us. We spoke to Tom Scholes. Spoke to many individuals. We've seen it. There's enough evidence out there to support that Emerson Royale wasn't a great signing for Milan. We knew this months ago. Nothing's changed. The amount of decent performances he's had, you can count on one hand. And maybe they're mostly not even full-on performances. They're predominantly halves of football.
Yes.
So we're talking about maybe like 2.5 to 3.5 decent performances from him, right? And again, Milan thankfully have suitors, as you just pointed out, with Fulham and Galatasaray. It looks as though that they're both probably going to be loan formulas, because I don't think that these teams are going to commit to a permanent solution in January. Not to mention, they know that Milan are in a difficult position with them. They're basically saying, we know the player is not what you'd expect or what you want from him. We'll take him on loan. If he plays well, maybe he thrives in a different opportunity under a different coach, and you cut your losses, and maybe you break even if you're lucky, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There really isn't much more for me to add on that. I mean, I think
I haven't seen a feed, by the way.
I can't sit here, Martino, and I know some people are doing this and thinking, well, at least they're getting rid of him. I'm not going to commend you for like opening your eyes and making a sale for a player that was universally and widespread. This is not a good move. Like, I'm not going to commend you for that.
Yeah, of course.
I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
I'm just not doing it. This is where we're at. This is the player we have. No disrespect on a personal level to Emerson. I know some people are very harsh and critical and little extra on social media when it comes to certain players. I'm not like that. I just judge strictly what I see from a sporting level. And he's not at the level that we need at a right back position. He isn't the solution. He wasn't the solution 6 months ago. You need to find a better solution for him from a for his career and move on from him. It's Fulham, great. He's played in the Premier League with Tottenham. He knows, has some familiarity with the league. Maybe he can help them. Obviously Galatasaray, we know that their fan base and Turkish fans they love their football, man. They love their signings. They want to know what's going on with these players and why Milan, after 6 months, are getting rid of a player who's played for Barcelona, Tottenham, and Milan. Why are they so adamant on getting rid of this player? Watch through our videos. Watch the videos of many other content creators. Read tweets. You'll get an understanding. Let's see. If he does leave, I wish him all the best. If it's Galatasaray, I hope you guys do get a player that you can enjoy, appreciate, and he can play to the expectation or the level that many thought he had in his earlier years. But he's not an answer at Milan, and Milan need to rid themselves of it.
Yeah, and there's nothing much left to say regarding Royale with that. And 100% bang on about, like, oh yeah, you want a pat on the back for correcting your awful mistake. No, you don't get that. You don't. No. This one is a little different with Pavlovic. I understand on a level where they might be coming from with this idea. couple of things. In terms of replacement, I really don't know what and where they can go to turn for this. Secondly, I understand Pavlovic has had his struggles. He's had ups and downs. At moments, he looks good, and other moments, he's struggling mightily. When I had tweeted out initially when I saw the potential news of him going, I thought to myself, okay, it's a disaster of a transfer because you're thinking of getting rid of him so soon. And the money that you spent and
Mhm.
who you got rid of in Kalulu as well. And they're both reflective of that. The Emerson Royale move because Kalulu's versatility. Selling Pavlovic to me is premature. Unless it's really coming from the manager that is saying he wants no part of him and he doesn't see a future for him here, and you plan on having Conceição stay. Even then, that's also not cemented his future,
Yeah.
the manager, which you have made a case to me off camera. Pavlovic leaving it's not a mistake in my opinion necessarily, but I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think that at this point in the window where you're at with center backs, that this is a good reason to get rid of your only left-footed one. There is talent there. This is nowhere near a finished product. We knew that this would be the case. And Nemanja had said that when he came on the podcast and described Pavlovic to us. He's also not playing in that suited formation for himself, which would be a third center back. He's got quality. I
Mhm.
think there is clearly a player in there. But the issue is, as you know, as of today at Milan, when they need you, the standards are high. The goal is higher. So there's more pressure for you to be better sooner. And when you kind of put on these expectations of making top four and beating all these teams, you need a more fine-tuned, proven product, which again is a reflection of cutting corners. We
Yep.
see again, for example, if we don't want to like go back and compare like, the combination of Pavlovic and Emerson Royale equals CDK's money, we could talk about how much Buongiorno cost. You could have kept Kalulu and also had gotten Buongiorno with the money that you had spent. Where is a thought process here? You're going to give up on this kid so soon to get who? How do we know that we're trusting your ideas for this center back position? For me, I think Pavlovic, if he leaves, I wish him the best of luck. I do think he ends up being a good player someday or a respected enough player because I think the quality is there. I think he shows a lot of the modern qualities that a center back would need: ball carrying ability, pretty good heading ability, but the recklessness in which he plays with,
Yeah.
it's obvious, and the marking is poor. I actually just don't like it. I don't truthfully love the idea of getting rid of him. And you're going to get it for less money because you spent around 20-ish million for the guy. Now you're dumping him. There's no way you get as much as like you initially had bought him for. For me, I think this is a premature move to give up on Pavlovic. Um, I just don't get it. To me, this is just a signaling of you're trying to like cut your losses, maybe, or rid of your mistakes. I don't think Pavlovic has been particularly good this year, but I don't think he's worth getting rid of after 6 months. Do you agree with that? Or are you kind of like, well, at this rate, he doesn't have much of a role this season. Maybe you do kind of move on from him and try and get someone more reliable in. Personally, I kind of just don't see it that way. I think you kind of have to stick with him and hope he develops, sort of like what we've seen with Gabion Chow, that you kind of can't give up on these center backs too soon because
Mhm.
there is quality there and they might just need more time. And guess what? Center backs take a longer time to
Yeah.
develop than other positions. So, your thoughts on this potential sale?
Yeah, no, I'm just kind of looking up to kind of get an idea of the top total amount of minutes he's played. And it's under 1,000. Like this, we don't have a long stretch of games with him, and maybe that's more of an indication of where he's at in his development, right? The fact that he can't be trusted by not one but two coaches, maybe it's telling us something. But I think with the case of Pavlovic, it's interesting because I think that you and I agree that you know. Obviously there's some that chaos. He needs to get a little bit more controlled chaos to his game. There were qualities early on in the season. I think the goal against Lazio was like a big moment. I thought that that was going to be a moment where like we start to kind of see a player emerge. He's
Yeah.
had moments where he's caught up too far and players running behind, but then he'll have that recovery tackle or that big crucial clearance, and you're like, okay, like this guy, there's going to be blunders, there's going to be lapses in his judgment and overall play. But frankly, that's what we've seen with every center back that we have, right? I would agree with you. I think it's a little premature, but I think, again, it's one of those things where, truthfully, this management might not be here past this season anyway. So now they're in a position where maybe it's coming from Jerry, maybe it's coming from those that are making the decisions at the very highest levels of Milan and saying, okay, hey, where do we cut cost? Where do we get rid of players that are simply not doing it? And do they run very thin? Because if you sell a guy like Pavlovic, and even, let's say, for example, you were to get 15 million with like a potential bonus, right? Or it's a loan with an obligation for 15, 16, 18, whatever the number is.
Sure.
You bring in Kyle Walker, it's a short-term deal. The wages are not too high. The fee is what, potentially a buyout, like a loan with an option for
similar to like what Giroud is.
Yeah, it would be very cheap, right? So now you're kind of thinking financially. This team and this management, this ownership is very numbers driven. And if they woulda, shoulda, coulda, but if you look at it and think to yourself, as you just mentioned, instead of getting 3 to 4 players that you maybe will have trouble dumping if they do flop, how about you kind of get the more known commodity. You get the more known player. And that was something that I personally was hoping that they would, Maldini, Mazzara would get the opportunity to do so after the Scudetto year, right? Where we had the pieces in place. We had the foundational components of the team ready. We just wanted to Scudetto with them.
Yeah.
Now it's about getting, as we've been talking about in many episodes, right? It's not necessarily a quantity thing. It's a quality thing. Instead of getting 4 players worth 20 to 25 million, how about you get 3 worth 30 each? And you raise the bar. The known commodity.
Quality over quantity, 100%.
Correct. And that's what we thought was going to happen this summer. We talked about the reported budgets. We talked about the finances being good. And they just didn't do that. And based on some of their other reports, where you look at, okay, if they get rid of all these players, if they get rid of Pavlovic and they get rid of Emerson and they get rid of Chukwueze, whoever, you're still looking at the way they're reportedly going about fixing the team. It's all loan with option. It's all loan with a ridiculous obligation or a ridiculous option, a figure that the selling club, frankly, is not taking. Newsflash, we're not getting João Felix on a loan with an option to buy for 35 million. That ain't happening. I'm sorry, that ain't happening.
So you're saying like they won't trigger it or they won't accept that deal?
Chelsea are not going to accept that, in my opinion, for 35 million. And an option? No, they're not going to do it, in my opinion. Because you see the way that Chelsea's operating. That guy, what is it, Renato Vega? I think that Juventus is injured. They want straight cash. They don't want all these players coming back. It's a numbers game with them.
Of course.
I don't think Chelsea is going to get skinned by Milan again, truthfully. I know it's different people involved, but the way they're going about their team and the way they're going about their project, if they're getting rid of a player that team wants, you want them, it's money. It's straight cash. So Milan are in a very difficult decision. You're basically looking at a management and a team now that is trying to quasi-overhaul their team in 10 days. Because if they're getting rid of Okafor, Emerson, Pavlovic, and I don't think they're going to get rid of Chukwueze. He's injured. I don't think they're going to be able to move all these players.
No.
Again, more players out, more players in. There's no continuity within this team. Week to week, we don't know who the preferred center back tandem is. We don't know who the starting right back is. We don't know who's the main striker. Is Tammy even going to stay?
Skirta tweeted out about Tammy's loan.
There's so many different moving parts with this team that if you're a coach, let's say it is Sergio, let's say it's somebody else. If you're looking at this Milan team, it's again, and I tweeted this out, and this is my final point.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily Milan should sign this player because he's good and they need a player in this role. If you're any prospective, self-respected and revered coach or player that is looking at Milan will still have pull, yes, by certain players based on where they're at in their career. But if you're looking at this Milan team and you're thinking to yourself, they changed coaches, the management's unstable,
Yeah.
There's a lot of animosity. It's difficult to play there. It's a lot of pressure. Do I really want to go here? And Milan have right now, they have a club culture problem.
Very
It
much
might
so.
not seem like it because they got Zlatan and they got Rafa and they got some names in there. In my opinion, Milan is really struggling with their club culture and they have a little bit of an identity crisis. And ultimately, I think it's going to really be detrimental to what they want to do and what fans hope they would do when it comes to the market and getting the right players in that can move the needle. Milan, again, I hate to keep harping back on this, but when you had Maldini, you had Mazzara, you had Gazidis, you had a hierarchy, as you mentioned, right? As you keep mentioning. You kind of had like when you looked at Milan from the outside, not being a fan, not being a player, and saying like, okay, where's Milan? Milan used to be great. They just won a title. What's the current state of Milan affairs? You felt like, all right, Milan, they have some good players. That they're directors like Maldini, Mazzara. You have Gazidis, who's been around the game. He's been at Arsenal. He's been all over the world. Okay, like Milan, they're in a great financial position. You look at it and you're like, okay, that's all I'm saying to you. I'm not saying players are going to sit here and say, I'm not joining Milan. Look what they're doing. I'm not always going to be saying that. But I do think when you have talented players that have options, they might second guess themselves and say, do I really want to go to Milan right now?
Of course,
I don't
yeah.
know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the only thing that even makes them relatively attractive is the foundational talent of the squad, the
Yeah.
current manager, and it's still Milan.
Current players, by the way,
Those
they
are
still haven't
not
agreed to contract extensions for yet.
yeah, yeah. And it's funny to me because all those things should be true regardless. Those should always be the true things about Milan. That they have good players, that they have a good manager, and that they are a massive club. Those things will or hopefully never change, but they don't get it. They don't. The owner doesn't understand anything, and that's besides the point. Um, Preview versus Girona. Milan have a Champions League game tomorrow. Um, This is big. These next two matches for Milan, I believe it's Girona and Dinamo Zagreb. Might be the final two. I'm gonna have to like double check with that. But anyways, Girona, you had mentioned Pavlovic and potentially Emerson Royale. I understand where Conceição is coming from with these potential starts, Matt, because Milan do at the end of the day have to qualify to the next round of the Champions League. They're right there. They're in a really good position. Fonseca, at the very least, left Milan in a good spot in regards to that with their ability here to get 3 points, that could help guarantee them that. But with the potential starting of Pavlovic and even Emerson Royale, Milan need to kind of rotate their minutes and trust some of these players. Girona, not as strong as they were last year. They lost some key players, but they're still a respectable and quality side. This one is going to be at home at the San Siro. Always a difficult place to play. Shake it off. We've seen it multiple times. You play in different competitions, you were able to change up the vibe, right? We've seen Milan play shit in Serie A, then they go and beat Real Madrid. So at the Bernabeu, mind you. So for this, Girona not in great form. They have lost 3 of their last 5 when it comes to all competitions. Milan, this was their first loss since the Atalanta one. So pretty funny how that's all been going for them. Uh, for me, this would be fantastic. Girona is 30th. They have 1 win. They have 5 losses. They've conceded 10 goals. Funnily enough, Milan have only conceded 1 less goal in the Champions League. Girona having a really difficult time scoring. Just get a result, guys. Just get the 3 points. I don't really care to hear anything else. Morata relatively rested because he was suspended against Juve. Likely he starts within this one. Yeah, dude, I don't even really want to like go through a full breakdown in this. Just get the 3 points. Like if you got to start a couple guys to keep other dudes fresh and rested for Serie A as well, do it. Just get the 3. Seriously, like it's exhausting.
I think Milan do get the result. I think they gather themselves, and I think in Sergio Conceição's first game or first Champions League game in charge of Milan, they get a result. I think that the same problems that he's been very vocal about, the same issues that we've seen for months now under 2 coaches, I think they'll still show themselves. Champions League fixtures are obviously, the stakes are higher. Milan haven't secured their place in the knockout stage yet. They've been playing well in the Champions League despite all the issues that Fonseca had and all the players underperforming and below expectation. I do think Milan get the result they need. I'm going to go 2-0. There's my prediction.
There you go. So if
I
you're a
think that
betting person,
I think
probably bet Sant'Angelo. He's hot right now. Sorry.
yeah, I say two.
Go
I say
ahead.
2-0. Which again, Milan winning, scoring
Clean
2 goals
sheet.
and getting a clean sheet. I know probably people are thinking you're delusional, but this team, I think at home, and I hope at home, when it comes, they put together a good performance because if you guys haven't been aware of, Martina, you're aware of, there's a little bit of a thing going on here when it comes to the ticket prices of
Yes.
this match, right? So it's going to be interesting to see what type of turnout we get. I don't know if there's been any updates on that from the main Milan sources, but I know there was a lot of animosity, there was a lot of frustration, a lot of anger regarding the raise in ticket prices for a match like this. Maybe we see a boycott. It's possible. Again, another boycott.
They're very
More
upset.
ultras being pissed off. The only way you can really do anything to help combat that and to mitigate it is to win. So I do think that Milan will get the victory. But of course, there's obviously going to be more surrounding the match when it comes to the ticket prices, when it comes to, well, what does the rest of the market hold? Ultimately, it may be the players that, you and I just discussed, Emerson and Pavlovic, if they play, how does that look for the rest of the market? And as far as their futures here, who's to say? There's always things going on with this club. But for this match specifically that we're talking about, it's going to be a 2-0 win for Milan, and they're going to further cement themselves for the knockout stage.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what ends up happening with that. I don't really have a strong prediction. I think you were right on everything, and how, again, we know Milan are such a game to game basis. We'll see what the midfield starters are for this one.
I think it's Benacer, Fofana, and Reinders as the midfielders. Again,
it's tough. They need a break, and they just can't because there's no options. Loftus-Cheek, I think, is like back training with the group, I believe, right? I think quite a few players are, so that's the good news. Milan are getting more players that they can put in there. Hopefully that they can get some consistent minutes. I'll go with 2-1 scoreline. I think they're absolutely going to concede.
Let me see. There's a formation. Hold on, Luca, Biankin. So Emerson and Pavlovic could still play despite their position in the market. That's what, at least based on what I'm reading here. Morata up front with Musa and Leao as more like your external forwards. So looks like that we might see Musa as like a right winger in this game.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Benacer in the middle with Fofana and Reinders. So yeah, I mean, I think we're going to get the same midfield that got absolutely torched by Juventus. We'll see. Maybe Girona come out with them with something a little bit different. Maybe Sergio has a way of getting something different out of this group. I don't know how you can really get something out of a group of players that it looks visibly tired. Your main players look tired. The legs are gone for some of them. At least it feels like so in recent weeks. We'll see, man. We'll see.
Yeah. So I'll get to a couple of the questions here real quick. Fabio was asking if we'll be in attendance for the derby. Not going to state that publicly, Fabio. I'll text you about it. Ibra, you had too many questions, bro. I'll just I'll pick one of them. The 9 selection in the January. I guess you're talking about number 9s. I will say that I don't think they're bringing in a number 9. I think if you see anything in the number 9 area, it's going to be Luka Jovic out. There's much talk about strikers, but who could be a feasible option for the January? Okay, so we got to the same question. I don't think anything is really feasible in terms of that. You would have to have immediate sales and immediately cash influx, which I don't believe is going to happen. The formulas of the reported players that are about to leave are not of which that are cash straight up. They're loan with options / obligations. So
I also think too, based on the reports. Again, things can change. It's the 21st of January, so players can quickly get on the radar, and Milan could be in talks and make a deal happen quickly. Things obviously, if you know, even if they're not being reported, guys, deals can still happen. I know it's tough for people to grasp that sometimes because they're saying we're not linked with anybody. What are we doing? We're sitting on, twiddling our thumbs. Despite what we think of this management, I'd like to assume that's not the case. But yeah, I would agree. I don't think there's going to be a striker coming in. I think a Jovic exit, unless he's injured from the tackle from Emerson. I don't know if anything happened there. I could see him definitely being, shipped out. And if you look at the links to who they have been in the attacking department, which I know Sergio said that he does need a midfielder and he does need an attacker.
Yeah.
It's been not out and out number nines. Like Rashford, that track is done, it seems.
Yeah.
And João Felix is not an out and out number nine. He's like a second striker.
That would be the 4-4-2
He's not that type
formation.
of profile. So that's kind of who I'd expect if Milan do, that is get someone in that attacking department. Most likely it'll be someone who can maybe play off a Tammy or, play as a, second striker in this team.
Yeah, we'll see what ends up happening. We appreciate all the support, the questions that you guys bring in here. Again, you could follow us on Twitter at that Milan Pod. You can go and subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, anywhere where you get your Apple podcast. We upload the videos to Spotify as well. So if you want to watch our faces, you can go ahead and do that. Again, appreciate all the support. Serie Sit Down, MLM Podcast, Old Heart Rossonero, me Marco's channel, who was a great guest for us as well. Again, Milan Coast to Coast, Milan Weekly podcast. Milan Weekly had a great episode just recently. Old Hard Rossonero, great friend as well. YouTube channel, Football Kush. Kush always does a great job. He, like myself, wasn't able to watch the full match, but I'm sure Kush had a good review in there for it. Again, Sempre Milan as well. We appreciate all the support that all of you guys give us as always. And again, we love everybody and shout out to the community that we have grown on here. Jogo Benito, totally my fault to thank you for being on the channel and having us not lose. And the one time I shout you out, we lose. So not your fault, bud. But we appreciate you watching till the very end as well, by the way, for the shout out. So we really, really love it. And we hope to continue growing. 800 followers on Twitter. So that's a big goal for us. The TikTok stuff, I deleted the app off my phone. I can't re-download it. So you won't see any TikToks anytime soon. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Look out for all short form content on all the apps. So again, thank you guys so much and take care.